Julian.
Hey, Brian.
How are you?
I feel good.
How are you liking Boulder?
I love it.
Yeah, is it your first time here?
It's not my first time here, but it's my first time being able to engage with the Naropa students.
Ah. And how do you feel about the snow, first of all? Just so everyone knows, it's very snowy today and very cold.
I'm from Southern California, so snow is always very impressive to me.
Do you think it'll make it to a poem or a song? Some snow in mountains?
Yeah, I think so. I think it already came in last night. Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like the environment helps you write at all, or?
Yeah, I think I used to think of myself as a nature poet. Sometimes I still do. Yeah, I feel like last night Mari and I were talking about atmosphere, because I mentioned like atmosphere in relation to rhyme, like how the rhyme words create an atmosphere for a poem's mood. And we had looked up, or we were talking about the etymology, which means atmos is like mist or like vapor, and sphere is like sphere. So I feel like I'm in a misty sphere here in Boulder.
So if you used to think of yourself as an environmental poet, what do you think of yourself as now, would you say, if you had to call it something?
A love poet.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
But in like a grander cosmic sense of love.
Like love, not just to someone else.
Yeah, love, for nature, for people. My book Advice for Lovers was like explicitly a love poetry book in the sense of like erotic love between people, but now I'm trying to think of it in a vaster sense.
Yeah, and do you think there's, here at Naropa, we have all these different programs that are a little bit different from the rest of the schools, I'd say, and so there's this one program that's called, I think it's called environmental therapy or something. It's like environmentalism, essentially, right? And I heard from, doesn't matter how we got there, but we were talking one day about, it was all of us poets, and we were talking about something that they talk about in the environmental studies program, which is our erotic relationship with the earth, and how do we cultivate that erotic relationship with the earth. And it really kind of changed a lot in me. This happened at some point last year, and ever since I've been thinking, how do I cultivate my erotic relationship with the earth, right? And as a poet, obviously it comes up a lot in writing, first of all, but then physically, I think there's something about the physicality of actually being in the world. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about physically as a writer who, writers can be so in their room, so in their desk. How do you feel about experiencing the world in relation to your body, but also to your art and maybe your psyche and your atmosphere?
Yeah, I like, how painters will go out and like, there's that term painting on plein air. I'm not sure what that means, like maybe in the open air.
Plein air sounds like plain, right?
Yeah, maybe the plain air, out on the plains. I like writing in plein air, like at the beach while I'm walking. I always carry a notebook with me, and so I feel like most of my writing when I sit down to write at my desk is like just compiling all the notes I've made while I'm, in the environment. And I love that idea about an erotic relationship with the earth. And I think about that a lot out in the water, like when I'm in the ocean, swimming or surfing. I think of it as like I just like being out there. I'm not like a good surfer or anything. Like I just like to cruise. I'm a longboarder, and I kind of feel like I'm one of those guys that likes to go fishing, but really likes to just be out on the boat drinking beers or whatever. For me, it's just about like being in the ocean is so meditative and so just like overwhelmingly beautiful. And sometimes I see seals or dolphins or fish, and it's just like so humbling and overwhelmingly gorgeous. And it does feel like an erotic experience, like in the most kind of like expansive sense of the word, or like being able to, like with surfing, ride a wave.
For sure,
Like being able to like partake of that power of the ocean and like being able to like ride on its power, you know, and of course be like knocked around, it will always make you humble in relation to it.
That's hot.
Yeah. It's totally hot. It's very sexy, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and last night you read a bunch of poems about surfing.
I did, and I didn't realize that so many of my poems were about the ocean, and it made me realize even more like I am a nature poet, or at least like I'm always, I think, like trying to be permeable to my environment, and I think that's like part of like the goal of meditation, to kind of like make yourself available to like spirit or like divine mystery or like creator, whatever you want to call it, to like be able to be like have that channel open and to be like porous in that kind of a way. So I sometimes feel like the practice of writing is like a discipline of porosity, or like being available to what is around to come in, you know, like Jack Spicer's radio, like the poet is a radio, trying to like tune yourself to messages. And sometimes I feel like writing or poetry isn't coming from my own mind. I mean, it is, but it feels like it's a collaboration between my invention and something that's coming in from the outside.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and I love that idea of porosity, of kind of letting the world go through you, as opposed to maybe, you know, in this capitalist society, we all want to have an effect on the world. We want to kind of like, we talk about leaving our piece behind when we die. We want to live on and all these things. But then also there's a lot of value in just being a part of the world and letting it pass through you. That's beautiful. Yeah. Do you see your writing of poetry and your writing of songs different, or is it all porosity?
I just heard porosity sounds so much like prosody.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
like what a cool coincidence.
Write that down.
Yeah. I wonder if the microphone can pick up the sound of writing. Let's try.
I heard that.
Porosity, prosody. Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. I think songwriting is a lot harder in some ways than writing poems. Like, I can just sit and like write a poem sometimes, and in the morning with my coffee, and then it might just be a dud or whatever, or it might be a zinger, I don't know, like, or in between, or I might have to work on it for a while, but I can just like throw it away, you know, or never read it, or put it in a drawer or something, or it might become one of my favorite zingers that I like to read, you know, for a while. And I feel like poems go through this. Poems are like like I always feel like I love my new work the most, like a crush almost, like the bloom is on the rose with the newer poems, and those are the ones that have the most like energy and that I love to read. And then I'm like, oh, this poem is like played out, like what's, you know, what's next? But with songs, it's like you might sing, like I said, I could throw away a poem or like never read it. But with songs, it's like if you're gonna take the time to make a song, like to pair poetry with music, you really have to like work it out and like make sure every word counts. It's not that I don't think every word counts with poetry, but it sometimes feels like there's more at stake with this song, because I might play it dozens or scores or hundreds of times, so I have to make sure I'm really like wedded to the verses, or wedded to the lyrics, that they're more sort of like concretized, because they have to be like married to the musical form in some kind of way. So sometimes I feel like I spend more time on lyrics than I do on poetry, just because it feels like it's more set in stone somehow.
Yeah. I don't want to extrapolate, but from what I've read of your poetry, I feel like you do kind of have this erotic relationship with the way you write and the way things sound, and you're just so playful, and you let yourself cut words in half. You let the French come in, you let indigenous words come in, you let it's just like as if you're just having so much fun. And if I was to portray your poetry in a bed, it would be very much like it would be maybe like a foursome, you know. It's like,
very pansexual.
Yeah, it's very pansexual. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of beautiful noises, and I can feel that,
and accoutrements, maybe.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I'm just thinking of that now. You know, that's beautiful. I can see how you feel that eroticism when you're writing words and prosody, and you hear yourself, right? And I guess because of music structure, there's just so much more. Maybe that would be more heteronormative, right? It would be more wife and husband making a baby, which is still fun. I mean, that's how we were all made, I guess.
Sure they have fun with that. Was there a question in there? Oh, you were making an observation.
Yeah, I was extrapolating because I love doing that.
Yeah, I mean, we keep talking about eroticism, and I think, yeah, eroticism in like a much grander sense than just like having to do with sex per se, but being like in the sensorium and like the full experience of life. And sometimes I feel like writing is able to help me like really love life, and love, you know, the atmosphere that I'm in. And I love to read poems. I love to write poems. There's nothing I love more. And so I think I want to allow like anything and everything to like come into the poem. And I have a sense like when I'm making something, you know, like sometimes people will ask you like, what's your poetry about? And you're like, oh God, I don't know.
It's the worst question.
It's not the right question, right, yeah. You know? And Mari and I were talking last night about like the atmosphere of the poem, and I think I sometimes think of poetry as like an emotional landscape. So I have like this sort of feeling sense of it, and it's not that it can't like partake of narrative or aboutness or theme or something, but it really comes from like a feeling space. And I just try to always negotiate that balance between, we were talking in the practicum about active versus like passive forms of making poetry, like this conceit of the muse, for example, in like Renaissance or whatever, old poetry is like, you know, something that has inspired you, and like that word inspired literally means to be breathed into, so it's like a passive act, like as if the writer is not responsible for what they wrote, which I think is really interesting. Like, oh, I'm just a channel, like it's just a thing that like came through me. And I think the idea of like combining that receptivity or that like availability to, or porosity to the outside with like your own, if one's own is even real.
What would be like a super active way of creating poetry?
Yeah, like maybe deciding that it was going to be about something, or deciding that it was going to be like have a certain feeling to it, without like letting it take you, you know, to try to take the reins. Yeah. And I think there's pleasure in both. You know, sometimes I want to take the reins, sometimes I want to be taken. Sorry. Going back to the bedroom in which everyone's in bed together.
How about, if I was to tell you right now, what is your, because you were saying that the poetry that you like of your own, it's like just like the new stuff that you're writing, right? What's the most erotic thing you've written, and can you please read it to us? And by that I mean like in the past.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, 2 months or something.
Oh, in the past 2 months. Okay. Well, I just have my stack of what I read last night, so let's see what.
And we have Isaac Hollandsworth on bass, who can accompany a sweet erotic little poem.
I feel like the title of the first one I read, "Who Has the Biggest Dick in Hollywood?"
Oh yeah.
Sounds like it's gonna be erotic, but it's like a little bit of a tease. It's not really about that, but maybe that's, since it's the first one on my page, maybe that's the one. Okay, yeah, I'll read that one. Who has the biggest dick in Hollywood? How strange to call this planet Earth when it is so much more so ocean. Yes, I did buy a cowbell especially for this occasion. Alone in the wilderness was how I liked it. Then, like an idiot, I invested in crypto. Even during the storm, I could see the blue sky. What you want in a trainer is swole pecs and a barkeep with a heavy hand. Then will you say, I'm comfort all the time, in thongs and shorts, and rarely do I go wandering.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like, but there's also something about eroticism that maybe is the desire more than it is the actual act of having a sexual act happen, right? There's something a little bit more fun even about wanting than it is
Absolutely.
doing.
And I think that's like the thrust, no pun intended, or no pun intended, of all like erotic poetry is like, you know, when you have the lover, you're in bed with them, you're not writing a poem. So desire is like the cause of poetry, I think, and desire maybe in like a bigger sense, but just thinking about all of that troubadour poetry where it's like, you know, the trope of like the poet being in love with like the spouse of like the night or whatever, you know, and like they're sneaking off, and you know, that's all the poems are about, like sleeping with someone else's person and craving their mercy, their you know, their body, and it comes out of lack, right? If there wasn't the desire, if the desire had been fulfilled, then the poem wouldn't exist.
Right.
So it comes out of a longing or a lack of something.
Right.
That's what desire is. That's why the Buddhists say it creates suffering.
Yeah, and I mean that could also be transposed to a lot of other concepts. Like the reason we have revolutionary poetry is because we're being oppressed, you know. And if there wasn't a need for that, it just wouldn't happen. And even though that's a little sad to say, we want things to be good all the time in the world, but then maybe art wouldn't be as good.
Yeah, I think, you know, in a way, art does come out of suffering, and it comes out of desire, and there are many ways to think about desire and suffering that aren't necessarily negative. And you know, it's like an itch you can't scratch, or it's something that's like bothering you. It's like you know, sometimes I like to think of poetry as like a conundrum or like a kenning or like just something your brain is trying to solve. And I was talking with the students about this Turkish poet had told me this phrase in Turkish to describe poetry, and it's where the shoe hurts the foot. And I love that, you know. I think it's like, it's just this little thing that's like annoying, you know, or bothering you, or that you're like trying to work out. And if there was nothing to work out, there wouldn't be any art, you know. So it's struggle, but the struggle isn't always necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And if you walk long enough in those shoes, you bleed. So
yeah, and maybe your bloody footprints become an emblem for something else, or an inspiration to something else, or food for ants.
And they leave a mark on your skin forever. It's beautiful. So yeah, in this practicum that you taught, obviously you're teaching about poetry, but do you also think that you maybe taught your students, or do you like to teach your students about something beyond writing poetry? And by that I mean, like, is there a lesson that you always try to also like encapsulate, like for example, I don't know, environmentalism, or you know, Naropa is a very white place, for example, and we don't get a lot of exposure to like Native American thought, for example. Is there anything like that you were thinking about when you were planning your practicum lessons or anything?
Yeah, thanks for that question and observation. I think that, you know, like the ethos of generosity is like really important in Apache culture, and I think that generosity is also a really important way to think about art making. You know, I I think that concept has really helped me, like divest myself from my ego. Not that that's ever entirely possible, but to worry less about how it comes out, or if you make a mistake, or what someone's gonna think of you. Like even right now, this kind of stuff. 10 years ago, I would be sweating and shaking. Like makes me really nervous. But I realize it doesn't have to be perfect, and this isn't for me. Like this is for you and anyone who wants to listen. It's not like whether I say something good. It's like, can I communicate something of myself for you that might help you? And I was really grateful for this opportunity to come to Naropa and teach this practicum, because Naropa comes out of like a radical queer Buddhist tradition, and it's a really groovy place. And and I thought, like, okay, here's a place where I can have the opportunity to do some kind of like weird stuff that I have never done before with classes, like including guided meditation and like chanting Om and singing the cosmic chants of Paramahansa Yogananda and like reading Middle English.
Yes.
And that's sort of like the encapsulates some of the range of the particular things I'm interested in. But incorporating like meditation or spirituality into poetry has been something I've like done privately, and it's not something I've ever like shared with other people. And so I appreciated having the opportunity to do that here, and that the students were really like not only like game for it, but like into it, and totally like willing to make themselves vulnerable. And I think the more you can think of your artwork as not something you're doing to like gratify yourself or to like be perfect or please yourself, but rather something that can be like a gift for other people, the better you'll be and the happier you'll be.
That's beautiful.